Now, we have to imagine that our INFJ teenager has made it past the phase of adolescence and has properly entered into early adulthood. We might say, from the age of 18 until the mid-20s. And at this particular juncture, I thought it was useful for me to make a particular commentary on the solipsistic INFJ, okay? Because as someone, such as myself, who has the privilege of interacting due to my work, due to my channel, and my sort of location at a sort of as a nexus of INFJ communities, having interacted with a lot of INFJs, I can see trends, right? I can see trends, I can see patterns, and there is still a tendency in INFJs to idealize solipsism. I see this quite often. I've seen even very solipsistic INFJs, I might want to say advanced, conspiratorial, lost in their subjectivity types of INFJs embrace forms of behavior which we would typically not associate with the INFJ personality. Because, once you get lost in your own world, and if you become conspiratorial, which is a real danger for solipsistic INFJs, it's possible to embrace views that are very callous toward other human beings. Partly this is why often solipsistic INFJs are confused with INTJs, because INTJs are similarly the target of misconstrued notions that if someone is like intellectual but cold and callous and amoral, then they must be INTJ, which is of course not true. There might be other types, such as a solipsistic INFJ, but not necessarily that. Nevertheless, there is this form of solipsism in INFJs where there's sort of the inner self having become so separated off from everything else that the views that this person embraces are really just evolving in complete isolation from any notion of what's external, including morals, because morals are never defined by just yourself. And I still see that sometimes, maybe too often, these INFJs are still viewed, if not with admiration, with a certain sense of envy by other INFJs. And now the reason for this, I'm pretty sure, is that because most other INFJs are compliant, the compliant INFJs are, of course, they're more adapted to reality, but they are constantly, if you like, fighting a sort of a sense of inner disease, which is the disease of conformity, the disease of inauthentic living, which means that whenever such a person interacts with a more solipsistic kind of INFJ, even if the INFJ ends up having pretty distasteful views on things, the compliant types will often envy that part of the solipsistic INFJ that seems to not be conformist at all, in fact, to be pretty anti-conformist, even though we could say a lot more about this, because solipsistic INFJs, when you embrace conspiratorial roots, you can often become conformist in strange ways as well, conformity to conspiracies or views of conspiracies or other forms of alienated thinking. But in any case, there is this temptation to view the solipsist with envy as an INFJ leading a life, having a mode of being in the world which is more authentic to who they are. Now, I just want to emphasize that, of course, the solipsistic INFJ can follow a path of authenticity, of more or less authenticity, and more or less segregation from reality. Not all solipsistic INFJs end up, you know, flirting with a schizoid, a borderline schizoid mode of living. You know, some can be truly original and thought-provoking and push ideas and not bother too much with expectations from the social realm. You know, so there's a whole spectrum of solipsistic tendencies that the solipsistic INFJs might embrace. Usually, this is all kind of taking shape from the age of, you know, during that phase of early adulthood, you know, where the particular life experiences that the solipsistic INFJ has around that time will have a strong influence over, you know, whether they become the sort of extreme solipsist that I don't think deserves to be seen as an exemplar for INFJs. But also, you know, there's options like becoming a genuinely, you know, somewhat eccentric mind, but original and worthy of admiration in this respect. You know, I think that maybe one of the deciding factors is whether the solipsistic INFJ goes to university or goes to, you know, experiences some kind of tertiary education, or if they can, for any number of reasons, has the presence of mind to teach themselves, be self-taught in a kind of critical way, you know, experience the critical gaze of other minds, whether in the actual lecture room or in their readings. If there is no such formative period happening around that time, often this opens up the possibility of the solipsistic INFJ never really encountering critical rationality. You know, critical rationality is not the strong point of the solipsistic INFJ. Sometimes it might be tempting to think that because the solipsist seems to be more sort of head in the clouds and more abstract than the compliant, that the solipsistic INFJ is more of a critical intellectual type. But no, the compliant INFJ is the more critical intellectual type, because they're the ones that exercise critical rationality all of the time. The solipsistic INFJ wants to be in the world of fantasy most of the time. You know, and the world of fantasy with PH, is the source of creativity and imagination. But if there is no rational check on it, it can sometimes go into extremes that are better avoided. Give me a like if you enjoyed this video, guys. Don't forget that you can support me on Patreon. Please consider it. I could not do it without you on the channel. Recently lost some important donors. So please consider it if you want to help me continue with this work. You get access to cool perks like access to our Discord server, the Fold, as well as a bonus video every 2-3 weeks on a topic of your choice called a deep dive. Don't forget about my book, The Infinite Soul, my latest book, the first thing below on INFJ life in the modern world. Get the book if you haven't yet. And the Ecstatic Soul, of course, also at the links below on the INFJ mind, still the most investigative, in-depth book to this day. All right, see you soon, guys, and take care.